Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Above Board podcast. And boy, am I excited today because I have a returning guest to the show, Mr. Brian Ahearn. Brian is the Chief Influence Officer at Influence People. He's a keynote speaker. He's a Cialdini-certified coach and consultant, which last I recall, there's only like a dozen of those in the world. He specializes in applying the science of influence in everyday business situations. And there's a number of accolades I'd love to share about Brian today, and we'll probably get to those throughout the conversation. But his latest TEDx talk boasts over 1 million views about the power of pre-suasion. And no, I did not say that wrong. It's pre-suasion. So let's dive in. Brian, thanks for coming back to the show.
It is great to see you, John. I've been looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, me too. We obviously, so for folks listening to this, the last episode Brian was on, it was episode 68, I believe. And we talked about the importance and the power of ethical persuasion. And we've stayed in touch, over the past year and a half or so. But Brian, you have more going on than anybody I know. I mean, I just like the amount of books you've written, this TEDx that you're in. And yet, your level of availability and communication, like on a personal level on LinkedIn and like just stay in touch in social media, it's quite something.
Thank you. I appreciate that. My wife tells me a lot that she doesn't know anybody who's as good at networking, and not networking like the glad handing and, pat and backs and things, but genuinely getting to know people and really enjoying them. So I want to stay in touch with people like you and so many other podcasters that I've met and clients I've worked with. And I will share with you a very quick story about the benefit of that. There was a client that I had worked with in 2019, did a lot of work with them. And then as the years went by and I stayed in touch, the VP of sales said, "Hey, I don't know if there's going to be any opportunities because, it looks like there might be a recession." And I said, "That's okay. I've really enjoyed my time with you and I want to make sure we stay in touch." And so we stayed in touch. Well, when our daughter got married a couple of years ago, and I sent an email to him and to a lot of other people and said it was the best day of my life so far and had some pictures, he came back with a very gracious response. But then he said, "I'm getting married next year in Germany." That's where he's from. He said, "I would love it if you and Jane would come to the wedding." So we were like, heck yeah. That's all we needed was the right reason to go over. And so we spent time in Germany and Central Europe, and it all started with him. And it all started with just genuinely staying in touch with somebody because I enjoyed him.
I love that. And it's funny. I remember you talking about that on the last podcast that we did together. Not that story in specific, but your pursuit of just keeping connections alive and staying in touch with people. And I think it's one of the things we're going to talk about is why is yes so important. That's one of the questions I have for you. But you made a comment to me that I loved in the last podcast, which was, I'll kind of stay in touch with people and check in quarterly or just reach out until they tell me to scram or like go away. Like I'll stay in touch. And I think that is the power of a good connector and a networker. And if you recall, I don't even know if this is worth mentioning too, but David DeSalle and Ivan Farber are the reasons that we connected. So two other great conversationalists and connectors within our community. So yeah. I think it's pretty cool.
And I've stayed in pretty close contact with Ivan. Wasn't a podcast, but it was kind of a learning episode that he did for a cohort of people. And he's been a very genuine connector as well.
I love it. I love it so much. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit. I want everyone listening to this to go check out the TEDx talk that you did. Because I loved it. I listened to it twice. So I don't want to spoil it for everybody, but can you maybe share with us a little bit about that talk and what pre-suasion means?
Sure. So I was fortunate to get selected to do a local TEDx event. And I was really excited because family and friends were going to be able to see it. And then it was canceled because of COVID. So 3 years later or so, I finally got an opportunity to do it. Pre-suasion is about the things that we do before we even try to influence somebody that might change them in a way to make them more receptive to whatever we might ask. So a lot of people focus on how to persuade, and that's great. It's better than not. Most people don't even like forwardly think about how I should go about trying to influence or persuade. But this is all about setting the moment up. What can we do to change maybe how somebody thinks, feels, or processes what is going to come next? And there are so many things that we can do. There are little things that we can do that can put people in that right frame of mind so that when we make the ask, we hear yes more often.
So before we talk about, because I have a couple questions on what some of those things are and just some examples, but just for the audience listening to this, thinking about, we talked about this last time, but it's worth mentioning again. Like, you hear the word persuasion, it could potentially have a negative connotation. Same with the word sales. Like, people are, it's a bit of a dirty word sometimes. And so what we're talking about is doing things above board and doing it in an ethical way. But I just want, I know you and I know your intent, so I already know where this is going. But maybe could you speak to that a little bit? Maybe for the skeptic that's like, persuasion, pre-suasion, and framing things for someone to say yes, that feels wrong.
Sure. So here's the reality. Every one of us every day is trying to influence and persuade people. I mean, the most simple thing, if you say to your children, clean your room, right? You're trying to change their behavior. If your spouse, asks you to stop at the grocery store on the way home, they're trying to influence your behavior. We do this every day for the entirety of our lives. When we talk about doing it ethically, there are three things that we have to be ethical. The first is truthfulness. And it's not enough to tell the truth, John. We never hide the truth. If we know there's a deficiency, and there's always deficiency in any product or service, and we are trying to hide that, and somebody comes to that conclusion on their own, especially maybe after making a sale, and they ask, well, why didn't you tell me that, John? To say you didn't ask is not defensible. They will not be looking at you as an ethical influencer. So we tell the truth, and we also don't hide the truth. But we learn through the influence process that we can bring up shortcomings in our service, our product, or whatever it is that we might be proposing, and we can actually gain trust if we do it the right way. The second thing that is a must-have is we only use the psychology, the principles of persuasion, in ways that are natural to the situation. So we don't try to manufacture a false sense of scarcity just because we know that causes people to say yes more. We don't try to engage the principle of liking by using flattery, just complimenting somebody on anything just so they'll say yes to us. We only use these principles when they're naturally available. And then the third thing is we're looking to create mutually beneficial situations, or Stephen Covey would say win-win. It's not enough that what I'm proposing is good for me. It has to be good for you as well. And so I like to put it this way: good for me, good for you, then we're good to go. If we can hit all three of those, then I think we are acting in a way that is ethical and above board.
I love that. And the scarcity thing, that has me thinking of all these scenarios where, we've all been in that situation. Like, I don't know, you're doing a free, like a gym membership trial or something. And at the end of the membership, they're like, but today only, if you sign up right now. But this offer ends when you walk out that door, and you're like, it doesn't really. They're creating this scarcity. And, for me, I hate being in those situations. So you're right. I think the way you frame this, truthfulness, I forget how the second one was like, but basically not using a scarcity tactic. How did you frame that part again?
That we're only using principles that are natural or genuinely present in the situation.
Yeah. And then mutually beneficial situations. So you said this, and this is, it's always, when we do podcasts like this, I love this because for me, it's kind of like a journey of learning, and we get to document it along the way. And something that I took away from the last podcast we did together that I thought was so useful was, you're not trying to get other people to like you.
Mm-hmm.
You're trying to genuinely take an interest and like that other person.
Right.
Can you shed a little bit of light on that again? Because I'm probably butchering that, and you explained that much better than I did. But that's a mindset that it shifted the way I saw things going into conversations with people. But it was like, no, let me take a genuine interest in this person, and my authenticity will shine through as a result of that.
Sure. So the principle of liking says it's easier for people to say yes to us if they know us and like us. And we all understand that, right? It's very easy for us to say yes to people that we like. It's easy for people who like us to say yes to us. But the mistake that a lot of people make in terms of utilizing that principle is trying so hard to get people to like them. Now, again, if people like them, it's going to make it easier for them to say yes. But it is far more effective to use that principle really on yourself to come to know and like the people that you're with. And the reason that becomes so important is I am assuming, John, that you and all of your listeners have a BS meter. You can tell when somebody really likes you. You see a look in the eye, you hear the tone of voice, smile, body language. All of these things are registering in the subconscious at lightning speed. But when we have a sense that somebody really likes and cares for us, we become so much more open to whatever they might ask. Because also deep down, we believe this: friends do right by friends. I wouldn't manipulate my friends. I know you wouldn't, John. I trust your listeners wouldn't. So the more that we make friends of the people that we are interacting with by coming to know and like them, then that begins to change the relationship. So if I go back to my friend who's from Germany, if I had only been flattering or trying to use this principle to get him to like me, to get more business, I'm sure he would have seen through that. But I really got to know him and put this into practice. And all of a sudden, something wonderful blossomed from it. And you know what the cool thing is, too? Now that the economy had changed, I'm doing business with that organization again. If I had cut it off at saying, okay, well, no opportunity here, I would have missed out on a wonderful trip with my wife to get to spend his day, his special day with he and his bride, and then the opportunity that now has presented itself.
I love that. So if we go back to persuasion a little bit, which, as you said, it's kind of, you're creating conditions, or you're priming, you're setting the stage for people to say yes.
Mhm.
Can you give me some examples of what that might mean or what that would look like?
Sure. One example is like if we can change the mindset of the person. And one of the studies that I share in the talk, an experiment was set up where people would come into a grocery store. And as they were coming in, there was somebody from a marketing firm who would engage them. And they would say, I might say, hi, I'm with a marketing firm. We've represent ABC company. They've come out with a new type of pop. And we are asking customers, if you're willing to give us your email address, we will send you an email with coupons for free samples. And under that condition, 33% of people gave their email willingly. At a later time, 76% of people said yes to the exact same request. The difference was they had a persuasive opener. They asked a question that changed where people were mentally in the moments before they made their request. And what that was when somebody would walk in, they'd say, excuse me, do you consider yourself to be adventurous? Somebody who likes to try new things? Well, we can all think of a time or two where we were adventurous, and we all try new things all the time. So nearly everybody said yes to that. And once they did, that's where they stepped in and said, I work for a marketing firm, yada, yada, yada. But at that point, when people saw themselves as people who were adventurous and like to try new things, more than double the number were willing to give the email address.
I feel like I fall into those categories. Everybody does, but and it's funny because when I was listening to your TEDx talk, I heard you explain that exact scenario before you explained the persuasive thing that they said. I thought, huh, I wonder how they made that. I wonder how they were able to influence that. I wonder what he's going to say. And when you said that, like as you were saying that, it's like, are you an adventurous person? I'm like, yeah, I could see myself wanting to answer this. Like I do those things. Like I'm adventurous. And so it's just amazing how quickly just a subtle question placed at the right time
Mm-hmm.
can persuade it. It's really cool.
And most people would deny that had anything to do with their decision making. And because they're unaware of it, because it's being
Mhm.
driven by the subconscious. So it wasn't that they might have been forward thinking on that. Some of them might, but most of them probably not. They just answer the question, and then that next question comes in, and all of a sudden they're reacting to it. Um, Much of this psychology operates at the subconscious level because, according to research, 95% or more of our decision making happens at the subconscious level. So, quite often, people will try to deny that that's the reason they made the decision. On an individual level, I can't say, well, you did because of that. But we can look at the macro and say, when you go from 33 to 76%, and the only difference is that opener, we know that that opener changed how people thought and then ultimately behaved.
I have what I think is a bit of an unconventional question, and I might not articulate this well enough. So hopefully I can at least explain it enough to make some sense of it. But how could you apply this this idea of persuasion to your own internal dialogue? So, like you mentioned, at the subconscious level, so many decisions we make are subconscious. I think for me, like I've explored the last several years the importance of active visualization and journaling, like things I never messed with before. And it wasn't until recently that I kind of realized, like, you know what, maybe I have some self-talk or some internal dialogue that's like skewing negative, like saying no to something before I should, or giving myself some like limiting belief on my potential. And so that's a long-winded question to ask you, but what are your thoughts on that? Like, could you apply this? Because I think a lot of people would think of this persuasion and persuasion as like an external force to work with others, but probably can be used internally as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, now it's interesting that they say, somebody tickles you and you laugh, right? But you can't tickle yourself, but you can persuade yourself. So I will give you a couple of examples. Music. For many of us, music can like transport us back in time. Maybe the song that you heard when you first met your wife, or when you were in high school, and how you felt during those times. Songs have that ability. So when I recognize that, and I did this a long time ago, I have on my tunes, I have a playlist called Jane, and it just has all the songs that make me feel good feelings and good thoughts about my wife. So if I was driving home when I had my corporate job on a Friday and I knew we were going out, and if I'm playing that playlist, I'm priming myself, I'm persuading myself to get into a mood by choosing to listen to these songs that remind me about how much I love her. I had a playlist for my daughter. So if I was going to be hanging out with her, and the songs that really make me think wonderful things about her. I have playlists for working out. Some playlists I listened to before I would get up and do some training or be on stage, just to change how I was feeling inside, to ultimately change how I was responding to the environment that I was in.
So when you say that, like when I hear thinking of a playlist for working out, I thought, yeah, that makes sense. Like everyone listening to this has heard that before. You've got your gym playlist that motivates you to push through a workout. I don't know that I've ever heard anyone explain it the way you just did, which is, you know what, I got a playlist. I have a song that when I'm ready to get out of work mode, but I'm driving, I'm in that like mental detox time of I'm in the car, I'm unwinding and I'm driving to head home to my wife. I'm going to play this song so that I'm mentally present when I arrive and I can be with her.
Right.
Because I think a lot of us just have I mean, I know me, like I don't think I'm that different than other people. I get in the car after a long day of work and replaying conversations in my head, worrying about, oh, did I send that email? Did I do this? Did I do that? And what a great way to kind of like reset and like an anchor to almost like reset yourself and know like, okay, I'm going, I guess. And you talk about triggers. Would that be a trigger? Is that a right terminology for that, or no? Is that something?
We talk about sight, sounds, and surroundings are all triggers. So,
Yeah.
certain colors cause us to feel certain ways. Red's a
Mhm.
stop color, green's a go color, green's a money color, red's a fear, aggression color. So there are lots of things that we can do even with that. I often tell people, like, if you are redoing your website and you have a button you want people to push, you never make it red. I don't care if
Right.
it's your favorite color or if it's your color scheme. You're only sending fear, stop, and aggression signals. You want a
Right.
shade of green, which typically means go, environment, open spaces, prosperity because of money. That's going to subconsciously cause more people to click on that button.
Yeah. Well, it's as you're saying that. So what I'm thinking of is I think of my office as a good example, and we've talked about this before, both on the last podcast and since then. That it was an interesting phenomenon for me, like early on in my career, when I would start working with somebody. That first meeting, they're referred by somebody that they know, like, and trust. They come into the office and meet with me, and it would take anywhere from 3 to 5 meetings, that warming up period, for them to get comfortable and get to know me and get to understand my cadence and my style of planning, and if it matched theirs. And what I learned over the last several years, specifically during COVID, when we were kind of forced to go more virtual and put content out online and do this podcast and do all these different things to kind of share our message, is that folks were coming in, and that first meeting, they were already very convincingly wanting to work with. Not every time. I don't mean that in like a braggy way, but like there you could sense that there was something, and it took me a while. It took me probably like 6 to 8 months to realize like, oh, they're and I guess this is what's fun about this conversation. They're being persuaded
Right.
by content and information and the surroundings in my office, the pictures of my family behind me, we've shot video content in our office. Like by the time they come and sit down in the office, they either made the decision by that point, consciously or subconsciously, that they liked what I had to say and they liked at least enough to come in and talk with me again. They liked maybe the office, like everything felt comfortable by the time they came into the office. And, Matt, I always think of that as like our home field advantage. Like you come into the office, like you talk about color schemes, like it's very like calming, neutral tones. When you walk in, there's piano or jazz music playing in the background. So there's sounds to kind of like lighten the mood and impact. This is a huge decision. Like talking about not just like who you're going to hire as your financial planner, but just like talking about money in general is uncomfortable. We've got like that. We just talked about this a month ago on the podcast, and we since bought it. That sentiment that like sprays like hotel fragrances into the
Oh, yeah.
office. So like touching all the different like sensories. When you come to the office, you're like, wow, this is a nice, peaceful environment.
Mm-hmm. So what I would say to that is like the number one thing you or somebody else would need to think is, okay, if I do a lot of business in my office, if people actually come into this office, what would have them, what would be the optimal mindset for them to probably say yes? And I'm going to guess that one of the highest markers would have to be trust, right? If somebody's going to give you care of a lot of money, they're going to have to trust. And so then you start to say, what kind of environment is going to elicit trust? Well, certainly that low key music is going to probably lower a heart rate. But I think it's beautiful that you've got like pictures of your family, because they're probably somebody who's in a family situation or raised kids. They're going to connect on that. But I think that says something about an individual showing their family, like, I like this guy. This guy's a family person. There's a whole host of, I think, trusting factors that come with that. Now, if you were dealing only with high net worth clients, you may take a different tact. You might have diplomas and you might have pictures with famous people and you might have certain other things, because that clientele might be different than who you're dealing with now. But it starts with, who's that client? What is the optimal mindset? What can I do subtly in my office to help them get into that mindset, so that when we begin to talk business, I'm able to get that yes and help them, not just getting this, but helping them, with their financial goals. And that's what it's ultimately all about.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to our show. Are you looking for shorter daily episodes of Above Board delivered straight to your Amazon Alexa? Join Canterpath 365 and get our daily brief with market updates, financial news, and mini podcast snippets like from today. Sign up now at canterpath365.com and we'll see you there. Well, and we talked about authenticity earlier, and I think a lot of it is just that's Matt and I's style and how
Mhm.
I mean, even if you look at like the decor in the office, Matt's wife Lauren decorated the office so beautifully, and it's meant to sort of feel like a living room, dining room setting. Like we're not like corporate stuffy professionals that are wearing 3-piece suits and intimidating. Because I mean, at the end of the day, like that's not what our clientele wants, and but more importantly, that's not what we wanted either. Like the day we started Canterpath was one of the last days I think I ever wore a tie again, unless I for a wedding or something. And not because I don't like it, I like feeling more casual and comfortable, and I feel like that loosens up the conversation. So it's very much our style. And back to the authenticity thing, like that attracts other people that like that as well. But so I want to go back to the mindset part of persuasion. And you mentioned this in the TEDx, and you were working with someone. I can't remember exactly the story, so you can share this, but it was this fine line between excitement and nervousness.
Mhm.
And I just want to go back to that because we talked about subconscious and we talked about like these anchors that you do going into different situations. And I think that probably loosely ties back to mindset. Can you maybe
Yeah.
speak to it a little bit and then share that analogy?
Sure. A couple of weeks ago, I was in Arizona and they had the 40th anniversary of Cialdini coming out with his book Influence. And that was the story that I opened with. One of my talks during the 2 day conference was about using influence in coaching. And I'm actually going to have coffee later this week with that young lady. So, this lady who worked came into my department after somebody left. And I just remember that she was very candid about having a fear of public speaking. But what impressed me was, on the advice of a former boss, she was trying to tackle that fear by getting involved with Toastmasters. Now, if any of your listeners have ever been involved in Toastmasters, you know that in almost every meeting, you're going to speak anywhere 1 to 5 minutes. So, big kudos to her for tackling that fear. But moving into the learning space, we were going to need a lot more than 5 minutes of her ability to be in front of people. And to her credit, she was very coachable. And I invested a lot of time in her. Anytime that she was going to present, well, I'll say early on, we would co-present. So I was always there by her side, presenting and helping her. And then when she got to the point where she didn't need me by her side, if my schedule allowed, I would be in the audience. And every time there's a break, I would say, hey, this is going really well. This could be a little better. Try this. And again, she was very coachable. So she was doing extremely well. But she came to me one day in one of our coaching sessions and she said, I still get so nervous before I get ready to speak. So I asked her to describe her thoughts and feelings that she labeled as nervous. And as she described them, I said, I think many of the same thoughts and I feel many of the same feelings, but my frame of reference for those is excitement. Now, I know you don't look forward to doing things you're nervous about, but I know you look forward to doing things you're excited about. So if we can reframe those thoughts and feelings from nerves to excitement, I think it's going to make a big difference for you. So we began to work on that in our coaching. And one day out of the blue, she stopped by my desk and she said, it really works. I don't get nervous anymore. I really get excited before I get ready to speak. And John, by the time she left our company, she was leading full day workshops on her own, facilitating the conversation and delivering the content. As I'm saying this right now, I'm getting kind of chills, like goosebumps, even though the room's really warm, because that wasn't just a big career move. That was life changing for her. For her to go from literally physical sickness at the thought of being the center of attention to standing in front of people for a full day was a life changing experience for her. And I'm so grateful that I got to be a part of it.
What do you think, was there just an aha moment that she experienced where she's like, I she wakes up one day and feels like I'm ready to take this on and I'm not nervous? Or was it just the reps? Was it really just the work that attributed to it?
You know what? I'm going to have to ask her this week when we have coffee. She never really said, but I think I will speak from my own point of reference that there are a lot of times where a change happens and we don't realize it until we look back. And then we're like, so maybe she looked back and said, oh my gosh, I wasn't nervous at all getting ready for this. That wasn't even in the forefront. So it was almost like it was absent. But I've had many of those things where I haven't realized how much I've changed until I was able to like really critically think about it. Or I like to journal like you do and maybe write something down. Or maybe a friend comes and says like, wow, you're really different. What's going on? And we have a conversation and you realize it. So some of that change, it's like our kids growing up. They don't realize how much they're growing every day, every year, but we see it. And I think that's probably what happened with her.
Mm. Yeah, that's a really great point. So I relate to that story, and I would imagine most people listening to this do as well. It's not, very few people are born ready and excited to go public speaking, but you know what's weird is, and you're talking about kids for a moment. I do see this transformation with, like, especially my daughter. Like, I remember her being in pre-K, like just before kindergarten. You could give her any topic. I mean, she was excited to go up in front of that class and to go share a story. Or, we'd go on a family trip and she'd come back with pictures, and anything. She would, fearless. And then I suppose something happened in kindergarten, and because, like, they, in class, they're trying to encourage speaking and stuff. And I'm sure she heard other kids say stuff like, this makes me nervous. I don't like doing this.
Yeah.
And it turned into like this learned behavior where now all of a sudden she's worried about it. And
Mm-hmm.
we've had to have some similar type conversations with her. And gosh, I identify with it so much because I hear her say this and my heart breaks, because I'm like, I remember this. I remember I remember being in middle school and having to give a presentation and just panicking and forgetting and blanking out. And it took me years to recover from that in those social settings. Like if I had to speak publicly, it took me years. And it's funny. There's a couple of things I think I did proactively for it. One of which was just simply the reps. Like I would just put myself in those situations. And this is kind of a weird transition, but this is for me. This is what happened when my dad passed when I was young. I was like 24 years old. And when he passed, I kind of realized like, gosh, life is so short anyway. And all these things, for me, it was like that, a little bit of that instant moment of recognition of, I don't think I need to be worried about this anymore, which is, I guess, why I was asking if she had an aha moment. I don't have very many aha moments in my life, but that was one where I just thought, this is so silly. Why am I so wrapped up in this? Life is so precious and so short. And you know what? If I mess up, it's fine. Like
Yeah.
I'm sure I'll forget about it in a week or two anyway. But that's just, I'll
Yeah.
be curious to see how she answers that question when you ask her.
That what you shared reminds me of when you said life's too short to worry about this. I remember early in my career at my former company, I was moved into a new role. I was developing sales reports, and this goes way back into the like mid '90s. So Excel was brand new then, and we were figuring out how to use all these tools. Well, I put out some sales reports, and a couple of managers in another office disagreed with them, and they wrote a pretty scathing memo to my boss, and he showed it to me, and I remember exactly where I was standing, and I'm reading that, and I was upset, but the thought hit me: your self-worth is not tied up in this. I folded it up, I put it in my pocket, and a few days later, when I was less emotional, I went through and I addressed every point. There were times where I said, you know what, they're right, and I'm going to correct that. I think they're wrong here. This is why, and I gave a very measured response. Well, unbeknownst to me, he passed it on to the CEO. And the CEO sends a message out to all the managers. And he said, when I put Brian in this job, it wasn't to be the resident SOB of the company. If you have any questions about what he's doing, I would appreciate if you direct them to me. And so I just learned this lesson that, you know what, if you handle yourself the right way, I didn't do tit for tat. I only was trying to inform my boss, but something blossomed out of that. I think integrity gets, karma comes back around on that kind of stuff. Not always. And we don't do it for that reason. We do it just because it's the right thing to do. But you're right. My career, I wasn't going to let it shrivel up or not enjoy going to work because two people disagreed with something that I did.
Yeah. And I think that's a great example because I know, I mean, you've been in this industry for how long have you been public speaking?
Well, when I first started in my role at the Travelers back in 1986, when they asked for people who would volunteer to like go to agencies and do training, I raised my hand, and so I would do that. I got involved in Toastmasters back in the early 90s and really ramped it up though in the last like 10 to 12 years. And when I say ramp it up, if I'm going to give a presentation like that big one I did at Cialdini's conference, I practiced for weeks every day, walking around this room that I'm in, trying to figure out how can I say the most with the least and be very conservative because I've only got an allotted time frame of like 50 minutes and I've got to pack a lot in there. And so to use your term, it's repetitions. You go
Yeah.
back and you just keep doing the reps, and then all of a sudden it just becomes who you are. And so I feel like I could get up on stage any day of the week and I'd be ready to roll, but I still practice.
Yeah, I know that you could, and I knew the answer was the behind the scenes, the work that you put into it, and I think the reason that I was asking that question, and it's so fun because this conversation is kind of navigated all over the place. I thought we were going to talk about pre-suasion and persuasion, but you know when when I'm hearing you explain like your ability to get in the car, de-stress from your day, anchor into a song, and then presently enter into the next moment. Or seeing this TEDx talk that you did that has a million views. I mean, I think anyone listening to this is like, oh man. I mean, I would aspire to be able to have that level of not even confidence isn't the word I want to use. I think like mental fortitude. Like it takes a lot of mental fortitude to experience some losses and some difficult business environments or situations, or the nervousness like your friend that you were sharing when it came to public speaking. What would you say, which I think I know what your answer is, but I want to hear you shed a little bit of light on that, because I aspire to these things. When I hear you say this stuff, I'm like, oh man, the level of awareness to go. And I know you're gonna you're, of course, because I know you, you're going to be humble and saying like, I'm a work in progress too. But to be able to anchor yourself and go, I'm going to go present in this moment, or I'm not going to let these things bother me, or as long as I know I'm ethically working in the right direction. I mean, these are things people aspire to. It's pretty incredible.
One place I learned a lot about putting the past behind me was when I was in college. Now, when I was in college, you had to wait weeks for your grades to come in the mail. And I just remember I'd get home and some of my friends would be like, wow, I don't know. I'm hoping I got an A. I'm like, I'm not even going to think about it. I can't change it. It is what it is. It's summer. I'm going to just have fun. And I was able to start moving that into other things that I do, where if something happened, like when my opportunity to do the TED Talk the first time got canceled because of COVID, yes, I was upset. But I quickly realized, you know what, there's a lot of other people who've got it worse with what was happening with COVID. And I said, I can turn this into a talk that I do at conferences. So I did that. And I ended up making money by expanding that. And so I just tried to say, okay, I can't control what happened. What can I do going forward? What's my goal and how can I reach that? And that I think is really served me well as I've taken that kind of mental approach into a lot of other areas of my life where, if I can't control it, I'm not even going to worry about it. I'm only going to focus on the things that I can control and how do they align with what my goals are.
Yeah,
I would say this too.
yeah, go ahead.
That whole mental part. I'm not a golfer. My wife loves golf and she's really good, but we will watch golf on the weekends. I don't want to play, but I enjoy watching it. I love Scotty Scheffler and I would love to have dinner with him. And I wouldn't talk about golf at all. I would talk about his mindset. I'm like, how do you, bogey maybe the first two holes and then turn it around and you're in the hunt or you win it. What are you doing? Because so many guys can't do that. I would love to just understand how his mind works.
Well, I think that speaks to your thirst for knowledge and learning, and like you said earlier, the progress and the repetitions. I didn't mean for a lot of the conversation to kind of go more towards like internal persuasion, versus external. But leading up to our conversation today, it just had me thinking a lot about some of the mental work I'm doing. Like
Mm-hmm.
you shared just a moment ago, there's only so much you can control. So like worrying about the things that are within your power and letting go of the things you can't control. I mean, that's stuff that you hear that. Like I hear you say that and I'm like, yes, I know that. I know that. But then I think, okay, am I subconsciously practicing that all the time? Because I am, like I'm a worrier. I just am. It's part of me, and it's something that I'm working on. And I think a lot of people listening to this probably identify with that, and so it's kind of helpful to like get inside your mind. That's why I like having you on this podcast, so we can talk more about this stuff.
Yeah. Well, I enjoy the conversations, guys. I think they're so important. I think there are so many little things that we can do that will change us, and by changing ourselves, we begin to change the people who are around us. Right? If I change myself mentally on the drive home, and my wife sees that I'm in a good mood, we're going to have a better time, better evening. If my wife if my daughter comes in and sees that I'm so excited to see her because maybe I've been doing something like listening to music or thinking about the opportunity to see her, that changes the interaction. So changing ourselves can have much greater influence on those around us than we probably think.
That's a very solid point, because I can speak from experience where, there was a time not that long ago, a few months ago, just very trying, just very busy with work. It was busy, lots of meetings, coming and going to the office. And there must have been enough days of repetition where I came home somber and kind of like, just bringing down the collective mood in the household, that on this one particular day, my wife sent me a text and she said something to the effect of, she sent a picture of the kids and she said, "Hey, everyone's having an awesome night. Bring that energy."
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a good, and I like that because we can hold each other accountable like that. It's not something like that's not going to turn into a fight for us. That's like, I was able to pull myself out of it and go, all right, I get it. I'm tired. Woe's me. I've had a lot of meetings the last few days, but clearly I'm bringing that kind of energy into the household, and I got
Mm-hmm.
to do something to fix it. So I just love that that idea that you share. I mean, I know I keep going back to it, but I think it's because it's resonating with me so much that
Yeah.
I need to do something like that because it's really important. So I appreciate
So
you talking with
definitely
us.
make yourself a playlist. You know, all those songs that bring out those good feelings towards her, or all those songs that make you so excited to see the kids, and start playing with it, and see if it's changing how you feel. See if it's changing how they're responding to you.
Yeah, I certainly think it will. And by the way, when she said that, I noted that, and I thought, all right, I'm coming in with my A game tonight because I want the positive memories. I want my kids to remember dad being happy with them too. I don't want them to remember like dad came home grumpy from school or from work today, you know?
Yeah.
So that matters a lot to me. So as I know we're coming close on time here, and I want to wrap with a couple of things. One of which is I'd like to mention your latest book. It's called His Story, My Story, Our Story. Would you like to shed a little bit of light on that? You've written so many books, but this is the most recent one. So I think we should
Yeah.
at least spend a moment on this.
So the book comes out on June 4th, and I've loved all the books I've written, and I was excited for different reasons, but I am more excited about this book coming out than any of the previous books. And it doesn't relate to my business, but my father passed away in the fall of 2020. It wasn't COVID. He had a heart attack, and he had served in the Marines during Vietnam. And being raised by a Marine comes with a lot of really good things. I mean, the discipline that I learned, and right and wrong and things like that have stayed with me my whole life. But there were also a lot of negative things too. My father saw combat, had PTSD, physical and verbal abuse towards my mom, infidelity. Ultimately, the marriage fell apart. Um, the interesting thing about the book, John, is not only does it have direct excerpts from my father, because he wrote pretty extensively about his time in the Corps in Vietnam, but I found my old journals. So I literally, as a 15-year-old, I wrote the day after I heard the yelling and screaming and dishes were breaking, and the fight that ultimately led to the end of the marriage. I have my exact thoughts as a 15-year-old. I have my
Wow.
exact thoughts the week later when he moved out, and I'm trying to analyze how is this going to affect me and my grades and my discipline, and I'm trying to sort this out as a 15-year-old. It made me think, when parents look at kids, when the parents are going through stuff, oh, the kids are doing fine, they're going through a lot more than you realize. I was kind of shocked at what I was writing as a 15-year-old. But the book explores our relationship and how it got very difficult when I started pressing him for answers about why did this happen? Why did that happen? He didn't want to go there. And so we butted heads for years, but we ultimately got to a good place. The thing that's most gratifying about the book, the number of people who've read it who can so relate to the experiences that I wrote about. One Marine who was a friend of my father's cried at the end of it. My daughter cried when she wrote it or read it. I had somebody email today and say, you know what, after our conversation and reading the book, I'm going to go see my dad in Idaho. So the fact that it's helping people reconcile, that's what's important.
That's incredible. What was your experience like going back and read? First of all, did you know all along you had these journals, or did you just uncover this unpacking like the attic one day and stumbled across this?
I kept them. So when I
Okay.
was a sophomore in high school, we had to journal and we all thought it was stupid, but there
Yeah.
was so much going on between, dating this new girl and playing football, and what was going on with my parents, that I wrote hundreds and hundreds of pages. I wasn't just writing the minimum. I was getting all of my thoughts and what's going on. And so I never threw them away. I did find some journals I didn't expect where I forgot that I had written some when I was in college, and at other times. And so I was able to go back and again, like when my dad and I had this really difficult conversation, and he just wasn't getting it. He wasn't getting why I was bringing up something that had happened 12 years in the past, the divorce. And I said, Dad, what would you do if I hit Joe? Joe is my stepmom. And he leans across the table and he goes, I'll effing kill you if you ever touch her. And I said, what if it was 5 years ago? He goes, I don't care. If I found out you touched her 5 years ago, I'm going to effing kill you. And I said, good. Now you know how I feel about the divorce. Doesn't matter that it was 12 years ago. For me, it's right now, and I want to talk about it. And I give him credit, though. He hung in there. He could have written me off. He could have said, screw you. And he didn't. And The fact that we got to a good place well before his passing was wonderful because he got to enjoy us and our granddaughter, our daughter, his granddaughter. But now this story is going to help change people's lives. And that's why I wrote the book, to help Marines and to help Marine families and more broadly, fathers and sons.
It's a beautiful story of reconciliation too, because I would imagine, you processed a lot of these things as a child or a young adult, and those are unresolved emotions
Mhm.
that, that's where a lot of trauma comes from for people. And you experience that differently than he experienced that, right? So all these years go by, he's in a different mindset thinking like, we're over this. This was so long ago.
Yeah.
And you've never had your opportunity to talk about it.
Right.
So yeah, kudos to him for being able to have that tough conversation with you. I think that's really cool. So where can folks find this book? Will it be on Amazon and places of that nature?
Yep. It'll be on Amazon, and it'll be in bookstores like Barnes and Noble, Books a Million. You'll be able to get it online there as well. So you can pre-order now, but it officially releases on June 4th.
Awesome. I love that. Well, as I knew today would be, it's a powerful episode for our listeners, for me as well. Remember, folks, to head back to episode 68 as well if you'd like to listen to our first conversation about ethical persuasion. At this point, Brian, I do think people could probably just Google your name and find you. But if you were to direct someone to some of your social media platforms, what would be some of the best places to find you?
Well, LinkedIn. And if you send me a request to connect, I guarantee you're going to get a personal response. If you don't tell me why, I'm going to ask you, how did you find me? But I think we should keep the social in social media. My website, my work website is influencepeople.biz. And out there's 15 years of blog posts, weekly blog posts, videos, been now on 178 podcasts. So there's all kinds of opportunity to learn there. And for anybody who's interested in learning more about the book, the website is just my name, brianahearn.biz, B-I-Z. You can go out there. There's a short video where I talk about the book, but you'll also see testimonials and more about the book. And you can order from there as well.
Keep the social and social media. I like that a lot. And you live that. I mean, guys, Brian and I connected on social media through obviously Ivan Farber and David DeSell, and you're a man of your word in that regard. I've seen it live in action, and you comment and you reply back to people and answer their questions. It's excellent. It's a cool thing. So, and we'll make sure to tag those links in the show notes for you to follow and find Brian as well. So, Brian, it was an honor having you on the show today, man, chatting with us and really helping change people's mindset and both internally and externally how we feel about pre-suasion and persuasion, using these forces for good and ethical reasons. So, and thank you to our listeners as well. We're so motivated to do this podcast each week. And I've said this before on the show, but this is a documentation of our growth, and it's an honor to share our journey with all of you. So that's it for us today on the Above Board podcast. We'll see you guys next week. Take care.